はい、それでは
Hello, everyone. We are starting the session for the afternoon. I am from RRI. I belong to Working Group 1. I'm the co-chairperson, and I work for IHI. My name is Murakami. Nice to meet you all. Before we start the afternoon sessions, I have a request. As we requested for session 1 in the morning, for the panel discussions that we have planned for later, if you have any questions, and if you are participating remotely, please go to the setting screen on the YouTube to go to the QA link, Slido. So please enter your question and your name and also your company there. So let's start session number 2 of the day. So we will have a lecture under the theme of data circulation and value creation. We are expecting 3 presentations, and then we will, after that, have a panel discussion following. So let's have the first presenter on the stage from German, Fraunhofer ISST. We have the director, Dr. Boris Otto. He will talk about data sharing and industrial data ecosystems. Dr. Otto will be joining online. Over to you.
Good morning and good day. So I would like to thank everyone for the presentation, for the invitation. I'm a bit sad that I cannot be on site because I would love to meet you all again. But this time it did not work out. So bear with me that if you would invite me next year, I would do everything possible to join in presence. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about data sharing in industrial ecosystems, and I would like to start with a perspective on data sharing, which is sometimes a little bit forgotten, which basically addresses the question, well, why do companies engage in data sharing? And we did a little analysis about, let's say, data sharing initiatives in Europe, but also in other places of the world, in order to identify the rationale, the reasons why ecosystems emerge in order to make use of data. As you know, data sharing is not an end in itself, but it rather happens for a purpose. And we at least can identify 5 patterns that are listed here, which motivate companies and ecosystems to form in order to share data. First of all, there is a very straightforward reason to team up, which we have also known from other, let's say, occasions in, let's say, economic development, which is cost sharing. In order to share data, companies come together to, for example, share a common burden. For example, to be compliant to a certain legislation. In Europe, in particular in Germany, one example is the so-called Supply Chain Act that has been introduced, which requires companies to be transparent about the adherence to environmental, societal standards across the entire value chain. And that basically also refers to companies up the value chain, so which basically means that information must be shared across the entire value network in order to make sure that nobody in the value chain is violating, for example, a regulation when it comes to child labor and so on. Other patterns are more, and this is depicted with the letter B, related to joint innovation, where companies and organizations alike team up to make to seize the opportunities of data in terms to create a new service, for example. And I always refer to examples from myself. So if I do a business trip, for example, starting at home at my home in Dortmund in Germany. I would take, for example, the bus that takes me to the metro station, and then I would take the metro that takes me to the central station in Dortmund, and then I board a train from Deutsche Bahn, which takes me, for example, to an airport in Düsseldorf, and then I would board a plane, for example, to Zurich in Switzerland. And then I would also use another suburban train, and then I would end up in a taxi, which takes me to the hotel. So, and in this mobility chain, you see that basically I am using the services of like 7 or 8 mobility service providers, but none of them basically is orchestrating my trip, right? That would be highly appreciated by myself because, for example, in cases of delays, for example, with a train, the airline could automatically book me to a later flight, for example. But that would require that all the different companies that I'm engaging with do not only share their data, for example, timetables, or let's say the flight that I'm assigned to, or automatically check me in when I arrive in the hotel, but also data about myself. So, for example, my travel preferences, also my credit card information, which I would be happy to share if I could rely on the fact that these companies would treat it trustworthy. And they should also combine this information from themselves and from myself with context information. As I said, for example, delays in certain train connections, or if I would basically go to the airport by car, traffic conditions, and so on and so on. You can also nicely see in this pattern B, so joint innovation, that these kind of innovations can only be realized if companies team up in sharing their data, so making sure that they can jointly use it. Of course, nobody wants to end up in a situation where the data is misused. And also, in order not to go through all of these examples, the general pattern is that ecosystems around data form for, as I said, making a collective use of the innovation potential of data. But on the other hand, every single participant must be ensured or assured that their data is not misused and not violating any legal provisions. Perhaps another pattern that I would like to mention, and I'm sure that has been addressed also earlier today, I believe that Mr. Hess was also in the program, is Manufacturing X, where multiple, also smaller companies team up in order to seize opportunities that come out that can be seized from using the data together, which no one could be realizing on their own. So as I said, there is a clear business rationale for forming data spaces, for sharing data in ecosystems. And I wanted to basically touch upon those because sometimes we get the impression that this is forgotten when data spaces are formed and data ecosystems are emerging. It is not an end in itself. Data ecosystems are realized for a purpose. As a side note, we study these patterns in the so-called Data Spaces Support Center that has been set up by the European Commission, which is an endeavor to, as basically the name tells us, to support the individual data space initiatives in Europe. And in this endeavor, we are also analyzing, as I said, the business rationale of data ecosystems. Talking about data spaces, it has been proven useful in the past to look at data spaces in, this architecture-like perspective. On top, you usually create data ecosystems. And let me also share one point with you. It is no coincidence that the term ecosystem has been borrowed by biology, because what we want to achieve is that the system as a whole is stable, perhaps also reaches equilibrium, so like in biology, But also, on the other hand, the individual members of the ecosystems are also better off when they join the ecosystem, right? So there is always the ambition to find the balance between the benefits of the individual participant and member of an ecosystem and the ecosystem as a whole. And if we stick for a moment with this analogy from biology, we also see that usually in ecosystems in biology, there is no central governance, right? If we imagine a pond, for example, outside the conference environment, there is a lot of, let's say, fish in a pond or frogs and also insects. And their population usually is, let's say, in equilibrium, right? So everybody finds their way. But there is, as I said, no central governance. And I would like to stress that because what we also see in data ecosystems is a tendency towards a higher degree of decentralization. So obviously, data ecosystems want to get rid of all sorts of, let's say, central coordination. Why is that? Well, okay, that's clear because central coordination always comes with a danger to a certain extent of, let's say, centralization of power when it comes to pooling data, which we do not want, and also power when it comes to, well, defining the rules of the game according to which the different ecosystems member play. The second layer then is represented by what we generally call the data space in a narrow sense. So the environment in which data can be shared, where also digital twins can be formed out of the data from different sources of different providers. And then, of course, since we talk about data that needs to rest in certain data storages, but also need to be shared, and also need to be accompanied with terms and conditions about the use of the data, which we call policies, we of course need to have a software infrastructure in place, which allows us to do that, to form the data space. And that is what we usually refer to a distributed data infrastructure. It is noteworthy to mention that, let's say, the business models on all these different levels are different. If we start again on the top, we see a variety of different individual business models. Usually there are, let's say, smaller startup companies that have a good idea, what they can do with let's say, combining data from different sources under making sure that data sovereignty of the data provider is ensured. But this is, let's say, as I said, an ecosystem which we don't want to control, but which we want to make flourishing, right? The data space authority or the owner of the data space is often also a joint venture, consortium, collaborative endeavor of different organizations. And I'm also sure that we have heard about Catena X earlier today, and we will probably address it later on as well. And Catena X as an association is a very good example where different partners from the automotive value chain team up in order to define their data space. But we also have seen that a first operating company has been created by 10 of these member companies in order to run the services that basically form the foundation of the Catena X automotive network. And also this joint venture, which is called Cofinity X, has been created by not only one company, but by 10 companies that team up, also competitors to a certain extent. But they have understood, they have seen that they are better off if they join forces because they are all confronted with the same challenges. And they are better off if they, as I said, bundle their resources and address the challenges together, in contrast to everybody trying on their own to overcome these challenges about transparency in the value chain, adherence to legal provisions, and so on and so forth. And on the lower level, on the lower layer, we usually have typical infrastructure as a service business models, which we know from cloud service providers, for example, or in general also other IT service providers. And of course, they have an interest to scale. And that is also the reason why the providers of, let's say, the infrastructure services are interested in not only serving one data space, but multiple data spaces with a common set of services. And I will touch upon that a little bit later. So talking about the different roles in data spaces, it is also important to understand, as I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, that there is not the one business model of a data space. There is a business rationale, as I outlined in the first point, which is a reason why different organizations and companies team up in a data ecosystem. But as I said, a data ecosystem consists of a variety of different, companies, organizations, and also business models. I said that we usually find an operator of data space core services, which would be, let's say, the lowest layer on the chart before. And then we have a data space owner who basically makes sure that the rules of the game, the rules of participation, the governance of the data space, not only the governance of the data, but also the governance of the data space is put into place. And then we have depicted here in green a number of different roles. For example, we have data providers that use a data space as an opportunity to share their data. We have data app providers that basically enrich data quality, for example, or ensure data quality, or offer certain, let's call them, value-added data services. For example, they might also combine data from different services, and by doing so, come up with a richer data set as the original source. Most importantly, we have business app providers. In the case of Catena X, for example, it's providers of traceability services or services to calculate the carbon footprint of a certain production and of a certain part which is required in the automotive value chain. And of course, on the other side, we have app users, so that make use of the app in order to calculate the individual carbon footprint of a certain instance of a part that has been produced in a dedicated production site on a dedicated production line, for example. And we have also, in general, data users that do whatever they want with the data if they stick to the conditions which are associated with the data and which determine, let's say, the conditions under which the data can be used. As I said, we typically use policies to do that. And that is, you can also refer to it as, let's say, being the terms and conditions in the data economy, if you may. And then we have providers of enabling services. This could be onboarding services, or also what we see right now in many cases is connector as a service models, because we see that in many cases you need a software component that is usually referred to as a data space connector, which needs to be run by the participant in order to make sure that data sources are connected, and that before data is shared, policies can be attached, as I said, to the data themselves. And this has been done by a software component called the data space connector. And many companies use service providers in order to run this software component for them. And if we look a little bit deeper into the specifics of the business model and the value that the data space provides for the different roles in the data space, we can see also a variety of different value contributions. For example, and I don't want to go through all of them in detail. For the data providers, we usually see that, let's say, a data space is a distribution channel, a sales channel, even in certain cases for the data. So they're saying, okay, if there is a data space to which I connect and I have certain data, if somebody else can make use of my data, I might be reimbursed and I might even earn money with it, right? And also, of course, it's a means for data sharing, as I said, in the cost sharing case to team up. Yes, and for example, data app providers, they also see a data space as a distribution channel for their app services. And also they are better off because they can use the infrastructure services and scale, of course, their offering, right? This is similar to the app the app economies that we usually are well aware of when we interact in platform ecosystems for consumer services, be it, for example, Apple or Google. So, and we know that, let's say, the platform economics apply, for example, scaling, and that is also the case in the case of data spaces. Yes, and of course, the value of a data space for a data space owner is simply the fact that, well, I mean, that's the reason for a data space owner to exist, to make sure that this data space is up and running. And the interesting thing is that we need to put all these, let's say, preferences and business model requirements into balance. That is also why I made the reference to biology, where the notion of ecosystems was borrowed from. We need to make sure that everybody is better off and that all the individual business models are viable business models in a context where the ecosystem as such can flourishing. And that is, let's say, in addition to, let's say, all the technical questions that we need to solve when we have to build a data space, for me, the more important question to make sure that the ecosystem as such can function. Right. So if we go down to, let's say, the key success factors to make that happen and to find this balance, you know, between the ecosystem level and the level of the individual business models, of course, there are a couple of, let's say, factors that we need to take into account. And we learned it over the last years when we established both data ecosystems in certain domains, like Catena X, for example, or, as I mentioned, manufacturing X is around the corner to address the manufacturing industries on an international scale. That's very important. These both initiatives are no German or European initiatives, but truly global ones. And I'm sure that Mr. Hess also outlined that earlier on. But in all cases, what we see is of great importance is as a success factor, trust. So I recently heard in a conference similar to this, this nice saying that data travels at the speed of trust, and I like that very much. And we can identify, let's say, two perspectives on trust. And this is what I want to briefly outline in order not too much stretch my time here. First of all, it's trust among the participants. Ecosystems are no closed shops. So there are companies that we haven't made business with in the past. So we want to trust them anyway. So we need to find technology and put technology into place that ensures trust among the participants in a data space. And on the other hand, it's about trust in the data and in the use of the data. And we have created two initiatives, which are also international. Trust among participants is something which Gaia X is dealing with. And trust in the data and in the use of data is the key idea of the IDS Association, which also is very glad that we also have a number of partners from Japan, for example, and also close relationships with RRI, but also with other initiatives in Japan, which is very fruitful and very mature, I must say. And I would take the opportunity to thank also the Japanese participants in the audience for this trustworthy collaboration at this point of time. Yes, talking about the evolution of data spaces, I mentioned that briefly, but I don't want to spend too much time. Right now, we are, I would say, in the second stage where we form open ecosystems, and I mentioned a couple of those. But what we see coming up at the horizon is, let's say, also the federation of different ecosystems. And what we need to make sure is that also ecosystems and the underlying data spaces are interoperable. And that is why it's so important that we use the same standards for publishing data in a catalog, for defining policies that we attach to the data and so on and so forth, because otherwise we would end up in ecosystem silos, and that is not what we want. So closing, I would like to share this proverb with you that obviously comes from Africa. I'm not sure whether that is correct, but I like this proverb anyway. So this basically says, I mean, if you want to go fast, then go alone. But if you want to go far, then team up and go together. And with that, I would like to close my little talk. And I thank you very much for your attention. I'm very glad to be part of this session today. I'm looking very much forward to also the other speakers and the panel discussion that we have later on. And please take my apologies for the technical issues in the beginning. So it was a little bit hard for me to talk while always hearing, let's say, the English translation. Thank you very much.
Otto 先生、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Dr. Otto. And sorry from our side as well. We'd like to invite the second speaker for the second session from University of Tokyo, Professor Koshizuka. The title of the presentation is Current Status of Data Infrastructure and Utilization in Japan. Floor is yours. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm Koshizuka of the University of Tokyo. In a venue like this, I often speak in English, but because I'm not really a good speaker of English, allow me to speak in Japanese with simultaneous interpretation so that my Japanese can be translated, because this is a rare opportunity for me to use a simultaneous interpreter. I'm not really confident speaking in English, and I tend to discuss only simple things. So, to give you a more substantive talk, I would like to use the interpreter this afternoon. Now, I often talk about data these days, so I'll just give you an update of the situation with my personal take on it. I'm currently teaching at the University of Tokyo, Data Society Alliance, or DSA, chair. And Data EX is the project that I've been leading. In addition, Green by Digital Consortium, I'm also chairing the consortium on green and digital. And with the X Business Consortium and other organizations have been chaired by me. So these are the different types of caps that I wear. Now, looking at the data infrastructure in Japan, it's very slow, to be honest with you. Data-related issues are being promoted very slow, even though it is in a digital field. I am approaching my retirement age, in fact. And before my personal retirement, I really want to see the successful launch of the data infrastructure that I envision. In Japan, data has been treated and has been attached much value in Japan, including the government of Japan. We do understand the significance of data, especially at the time of 311, when the Great East Japan earthquake hit the country. And that has been a major trigger for Japan to start thinking more seriously about the data. The major disaster that shook the entire nation demanded different organizations to work together. At the time of 311, data collaboration was something that was truly absent. Victims of the disaster, the name list of these victims could not be completed because different local entities had different character codes, which is unbelievable, and especially so for a German audience today. Different local governments have different codes, character codes for the files of the residents. So adjacent city cannot work together to create a joint list. So it's not really a matter of IoT or AI. We were much behind what we should have been doing, and that was even 10 years ago. Standardization of data or sharing of data and distribution of data are the areas when we have come to realize as our important agenda. And that was the start of Japan's digitalization policy with lots of policy frameworks and legal frameworks. Open data has become mandatory for organizations, for example, and that was a trend that started about 10 years ago. And after 10 years, things have not degraded. We have seen organic growth and improvements, but still speed is not fast enough. And what is quickest in terms of progress? Deep learning, machine learning, and other generative AI and all those artificial intelligence, these have been serving as the seeds of quick business with instant global coverage. My students would typically say that AI may be a bit more attractive than data. So much of my students would go AI because that is the route for quick money. And that is the reason that venture businesses are thriving. But these two are very different in terms of AI and data, even though they both thrive in digital technology. Their domains are very different. Data is gradual, if you will. I said slow because Japanese, I'm not quite sure it is a local phenomena or a global phenomena in terms of the slowness of the data culture. If Japan is the only country that is suffering from the slowness of the data, then that can be a very serious problem. But as I prepared my slides and comparing it with the slide deck that I made 10 years ago, I have seen much differences between the two decks of slides, suggesting some improvements, if you will. So that is the background where I'm coming from for today's discussion. This is such a busy slide. I'm sorry for that. EU, Japan, US are being compared in terms of data rule, data space layer, data platform tools, data models, and data quality and frameworks. There are different frameworks and layers. Different initiatives are being promoted in 3 regions. EU initiatives are quite systematic in nature. It is beautifully organized. That beautiful organization is something that EU is renowned for because it is a top-down culture of this continental Europe. Japan is more of a bottom-up country. That is why our ideas are not too organized. This is not to criticize METI, Ministry of Industry and Economy, but that is my personal take on that. I beg for your forgiveness, but things are moving, even though it is slow. And then that is something that I would probably have to correct what I have just said. Now, looking at the Japanese situation, domain-specific data platforms and data space, as the European colleagues call it, do we have data platforms that are becoming more like data spaces? We are more about the technicality of the platform without necessarily business models. But data platforms are becoming more robust in Japan as well. In Japan, data space and data platforms, I think that we have 3 separate layers. The first being domain-specific data platform layer, which is slightly elongated in this chart. And you have, as I will be introducing later, we have different data sharing schemes or distribution schemes. On the other hand, I think there are more than 100 of these because I do have knowledges about several dozens of them myself. And then if we are to unite all of the place to create the Japan data space, do we have such an initiative already? Data EX is what we are trying to do. SIP governmental initiative is another area where we are trying to create such a all-unite across the country platform. But the second layer is something that I would like to bring your attention to. In specific domains, we do have a more united platforms, be it automotive, chemistry, or space industries, or steel. Industry-specific data platforms are available. But if you look at the manufacturing and supply chain, we have a wider platforms that goes across different industries. That is something that we need to have. And local government should be bundled together if possible, so that the second layer can be better organized and streamlined, and that is the area that we have been working on. So on the right are the platform-related information in this chart. In addition to that, service or rules and international coordination and collaboration are something that we also have to work towards. So this is the situation of Japan, and we don't really have any specific chart. And that may give you an impression that there isn't really an overall map. But if you try to map up everything, we actually do have more than we think we do have. Well, one Japan team is something that we need to create. Japan is not as geographically large, so we can be a one unite Japan team. For about last 10 years, national government's open data is something that have seen specific growth, with 22,000 data sets being opened. And then we Japanese people are hardworking people, just as German colleagues are. Local governments start when they've been pushed to have an open data system. There are 1,788 local governments across the country of Japan. As many as 1,450 local governments have started open data. Public open data site catalogs. There are 1,500 of such sites, which is rather difficult for you to locate the catalog that you need to find. But that is another suggestion of the growth. 81% of the local governments, but in terms of population coverage, it's as high as 99% in terms of the open data initiatives that have been started at the local level. And Plateau is another eye-catching project. Japanese urban landscapes are put into a 3D data platform. Almost entire Tokyo urban landscape has been digitalized for the data platform, which I think is a very rare project, even from a global perspective. My lab is using Plateau data and putting it into a 3D printing for architectural output of Tokyo landscape, even though that can be quite a money-guzzling project. Land and mobility and infrastructure have been pretty much covered as well. And disaster prevention is the area where we take pride in. Japan have wider range of natural disasters, be it rainfall, snowfall, typhoons, earthquakes, and volcano eruptions, in addition to the nuclear disaster, if you will. So we have a widest range of natural disasters that we have to cover, but data have been organized to a higher level. Say, for example, the earthquake alert, emergency alert, when an earthquake hit in Japan, before the precursor wave, smartphones are alerted with a signal. And that is being made possible because we have network of lots of detectors of earthquake, real-time data analyzed with computers, and focus and the seismic scale is analyzed, and above a certain threshold, earthquake simulation is carried out. And with the focus and other information, then the information as to how many lead time Tokyo has before a jolt of such and such seismic tremor. And that is the alert system in Japan. And we not only receive such alert, we also have connected machines to stop a halt operation of the bullet train 20 to 30 seconds before the arrival of the seismic waves. And that is a system that is being created in this country. So data utilization and coordination is progressing, especially in specific areas like I have just covered. And that is another area that we Japanese people should be more aware of. And agriculture is another area, and this is the green-related areas. Also, local governments are working very hard as well. This is Tokyo Metropolitan Government's initiative. Tokyo has a size of a small country because 1 in 10 people live in Tokyo. Tokyo Data Platform Plan, Highway Data Platform Plan is being constructed or is being launched this year. And second largest city of Japan, Osaka, that is hosting Expo 2025, they are also promoting data platform development through the project named Orden. Also, in Kochi Prefecture, agricultural greenhouse agriculture is the area that Kochi is very strong at. Fishery, too, has its own data platform already in use. Fishermen use the data platform to have information, maritime information, as well as weather information. And I'm running out of time already because you see I am only half into my slide deck. And Data EX is something that is trying to bring everything together. Let me go into a newer area. SIP is a project, Mobility Data Space is where we have been working on. It is a 5-year project. It is a pretty well-funded project by the government. This is the mass application of the government for public transportation, mobility as a service application have been available in different versions. And data platform to serve as the foundation, GTFSJP is the standardized data format to collect data on bus services. Situation is very different from Europe because transportation is being managed mostly by the local governments, whereas it is pretty much privatized in terms of operation in this country. And all these different companies' mass services are being connected. There are other areas, be it aviation or automobile, different modes of transportation. We have numerous numbers of platforms in the area of transportation, and we are trying to add further value by connecting all these, and that is a 5-year project that is being launched, and I am serving as the leader of this project. And in the area of academia at Tokyo, data platforms, well, German is great because Fraunhofer is making a great contribution. In case of Japan, Tokyo and other universities have not made much contribution. So we really do have to promote technological collaboration as a test bed. With this in mind, Japan JATE system test bed is being created so that engineers can use it for interim data publication, and engineers can just use this test bed. And that is probably something that universities should be providing. And at University of Tokyo, JATE test bed, and as I will be discussing later, IDSA is concluding an MOU to create a Japan research lab with us. IBSM testbed will be launched within University of Tokyo. 5 years testbed will also be created, and fire testbed will be fine. So another experiment is to ensure interoperability of these different platforms, and that is a project that I will be pushing this year. At JATE, Tokyo University JATE is now in place as well to promote on-campus experiments using applications. Well, I'm running out of time already, so I'll be skipping many slides. So there are numerous number of projects being launched already. So what kind of data available in Japan? Japanese government is working hard as well in terms of collecting data. Digital agency has a digital garden city services are created and put into a dictionary, and open data enabled dictionaries are also available. And please take a look at these as to what kind of services are available being enabled by the data. Most of the catalogs can be found on this slide. Now, because this is a joint conference with German colleagues, I would like to mention that international cooperation is something that is very important. 5-year foundation and MyLab and Gaia X and MOU have been created. In addition, at G7, Japan's DTFFT is something Japan intends to make contribution so that international data flow can be promoted. So what functions should IAP be having? Japan, US, and European colleagues have been brought together to come up with 11 points of proposals. In May this year, this list was submitted to the G7 Digital Ministers meeting. World Economy Forum have also led to the creation of such a report on this slide. International data flow should be further promoted, and that is my intention and points of interest. And IDSA Japan Hub in November next month. This will be launched next year within Tokyo University of Tokyo. Research Lab and Secretariat will be launched within U Tokyo so that Data EX can work together. IPA and Digital Agency will also join the forces to further promote the endeavor. Technological interoperability experiments will also be within the scope of the activities at University of Tokyo. Sorry, I spoke fast and long.
Hi.
Professor Koshizuka, thank you very much. So now the next speaker for the third presentation will be provided from Mr. Dan Isaac, CTO of the Digital Twin Consortium. He will talk about the global status of digital twin examination and case studies. Mr. Isaac is joining online from the United States. So please, can you check connection? Mr. Isaac, are you there?
So thank you again for inviting me. I hope also next time I will be able to be there in person. But again, thank you for the opportunity. So I figured first off, I would give a little bit background about what the Digital Twin Consortium is all about, and then we will look at how we operate and then some example use cases, I think directly relevant to some of the things you've heard through the sessions today. Many people don't realize, but the Digital Twin Consortium is actually one of seven other consortia under the Object Management Group umbrella, which was started a little over 30 years ago as a standards organization. So it is a true SDO, and many standards such as UML, Unified Modeling Language, SysML, System Modeling Language, Unified Architecture Framework. Many standards have come forth as a result of that, and several of those have also become ISO ratified. Here you can see the nature of the different consortium that we have under the umbrella. And when you look at this from a progression of technology and capabilities, you can see how through this alignment, you can actually truly obtain true sustainable digital transformation. And really looking at the Digital Twin Consortium, looking at how we can provide opportunities in a collaborative environment to really not just bring about the awareness and cut through the hype of what a digital twin is and the value, but actually look at it from the perspective of really what are the main areas of focus, especially in terms of understanding the foundational elements of a digital twin, and then being able to bring that through consistent approaches, even open source. We have an open source collaboration community to not just drive the awareness, but to accelerate the adoption of digital twin and enabling technology. And that's as it relates to policy, security, interoperability, and even overall development. And this is done through partnership, through these collaborations between industry, academia, and government in this collaborative environment. A little background. Our steering committee members are very diverse. Our membership very diverse and continues to grow. We're over 150 members to date. And it's comprised of not just the researchers and the technology providers, academia, local government, but also it's about the end users. And you can see here the end users become that catalyst for bringing forward and driving use cases in these highly collaborative engagements and opportunities. And we'll talk about some of those further in the presentation. But you can see here the examples of our end users or members working directly with end users that really demonstrate through real-world applications the value a digital twin can provide. And just to set the stage, really, the very first thing we did was we wanted to identify what are those key elements of a digital twin, of a true digital twin. And through the consensus of the membership and then approved through the steering committee and brought forward, you can see here in this example, it's illustrating that a digital twin is a virtualization of a physical entity, in this case, remote wind farm, and or process. Think about supply chain management, operational resiliency. But the key is that synchronization. You can see that synchronization to allow the data from the real world entity or process to be provided back at a given frequency, often referred to as a twinning rate, as you see. So there's a synchronization mechanism to provide that data back, but that data then serves as actionable insight to be able to provide the ability to optimize or to increase the productivity or to prevent unplanned downtime, a whole myriad of things to be able to forecast that future event where digital twin effectively provides a crystal ball. And that's based on information that's happened in the past. So that's the historical data, based on the current data, the event intelligence or situational awareness, as well as being able to now simulate and predict with that highest level of confidence that outcome or that optimization, because you're looking at a holistic view from that data. We've heard about the importance of interoperability. We've heard about the importance of data. Data is the lifeblood of the digital twin. And the digital twin is a key enabler to digital transformation. So those elements, again, the virtualization, and this is actually captured at a real instance. So this wind farm exists. The data that is captured then provides that actionable insight to be able to optimize the output, whether that's increasing the efficiency or protection or preventing a situation that might occur into a catastrophic failure. But you can see what the digital twin, a true digital twin by this definition, is a closed loop. And some of the primary focuses of this consortium is really to how can we improve that interoperability? How can we accelerate the market by demonstrating through real-world applications the value at the different life cycle phases of the digital twin? So how do we accomplish this? We have here our working groups. So you can see we have 12 working groups. These are all member-driven. And they communicate and work together in a very collaborative manner between each other, because areas and technologies and capabilities between some of these working groups now pass to the others. And you could imagine, and in the middle is what we call our capabilities and technologies. So think about the vertical segments on the outside in blue, now represented through a horizontal layer, which is that capabilities and technology. Think about things like security and trustworthiness, reliability, operational resiliency, safety, functional safety. And when you're dealing with healthcare and life sciences, certainly the privacy of the data comes into play. So this is the structure of our consortium. Every one of these working groups is driven by our members. We started with 4 about 3 years ago, and that was manufacturing, that was natural resources, aerospace and defense, as well as infrastructure, which has now moved into AECO, architecture, engineering, construction, operations, and mobility and transportation. So separating out those different elements. And that provides even greater flexibility. And you saw some of the examples in terms of transportation aspects and the importance to Japan and how they're looking at that. So being able to have this wide breadth of coverage, we're able to look at it in the context of different subgroups and focused areas. And what we're able to do through this is identify areas that are fundamental, again, towards understanding a digital twin and how you go about starting the journey and what are the best approaches to take. And so through one of these areas, and this was actually based on one of our members' discussions with their customers, they came out with this idea of we compose a digital twin, this composability framework, based on a very familiar format. And you look at it in terms of, first, what is the objective of the digital twin? Don't look at it in terms of just the data itself or an implementation that you have in mind, but look at it in terms of what is that objective, and then what are the capabilities necessary to complete that objective. And then from that point, then you can look at what is the optimal technology to accomplish that. Then from there, look at the data that you have and identify whether or not you need to have additional data for more accuracy or precision, more synthetic data or real world data you can now bring together to really complement that understanding. And then from there, understand what that implementation might look like. So within the consortium, we have put together these types of frameworks, which includes both the capabilities technology. This was in a very familiar format, a periodic table, replace the elements with these capabilities. And then also look at it in the context of a complete or full stack framework, an architectural framework to incorporate those different areas and look at that from the foundational aspect, which has to start with the security and the trustworthiness of that data. If you don't have that secure understanding of that data itself, then the whole underpinnings of what you have built are in question. And then look at that in terms of qualifying and verifying, modeling and simulating, and then with the stress on interoperability, as we've talked about, when you think especially about scaling from a smart building to a smart city, and then scaling that to a smart country. How do you ensure the flow of that data is available? And then through that, we also look at it in terms of how do we demonstrate that value? We demonstrate it through use cases and case studies that, again, show that value at the different phases of the life cycle. And that's what we have released as our technology showcase. As I said, we also have our open source collaboration community, of which some of these use cases and case studies are part of that. Here's an example of the capabilities, the periodic table. You can see the structure, the organization, and this was the very beginning of this. Over thousands of downloads. We're now working on the next version of this, and one of our members has actually automated this and be able to operationalize this. So we created an entire toolkit. And if you haven't gone to our website, digitaltwinconsortium.org, you can download the toolkit there. I highly encourage you to take a look and understand from much more detail than what I'm able to go into this very high-level overview. And within those different working groups, those vertical focused areas, we have subgroups. And from these subgroups, that's where the work product really happens. That's where it gets developed and then reviewed and then released. So we have papers on reality capture, building performance in the context of environmental aspects and carbon reporting, precision agriculture, power system subgroups that are working across the board, and how do you ensure the safety of the power and the operation of the grid itself through decentralization. You can see several of the different areas, additive manufacturing, looking at that also in terms of industrial automation and how do you bring that about, and also look at it from a packaging environment. There's the mobility and transportation, which is truly a traditional hub and spoke approach, where anything with the word port is your transportation hub, a seaport, a maritime port, a airport. And then the spokes are the corridors, the waterways, the airways, the byways, the roads, the bridges, the tunnels. And we have members involved in all of these different areas. And of course, supply chain management is very, very important. And then we have a very strong academia and research working group looking at different types of grants available, different training and accreditation programs, and then participation to, again, help to spread the awareness, but also to accelerate that adoption. And this is within the research working group. We have we have 4 different subgroups, and we continue to build those out in terms of being able to address the knowledge gap, the skills, and look to that workforce shortage through educational awareness, different programs, and then different opportunities in terms of research grants, as you see some examples through here. We're also now working through our members to, again, increase that awareness is through creating and developing a book based on the work product, based on our members' expertise, experience, background in developing, in deploying, operating, maintaining digital twins. I strongly state that there is no other consortium in the world like this that has that breadth and depth and level of expertise. And here, example again, looking at that platform stack and looking at those different areas and fundamental to that, allowing a consistency in terms of the way we bring out the use cases and case studies that are also under our initiatives tab on our webpage. You can see several different areas, white papers, user guides, quite a bit of material that we have. But we don't just stop with the membership there. We look to accelerate these business outcomes and develop these best practices and bring out the thought leadership of the consortium and showcase it through these real world examples and give that expert guidance from these lessons learned so they don't get repeated. So you don't have to have this duplication of effort, but you can accelerate that adoption. And so here you can see our regional branch coverage of the consortium, where effectively a regional branch organizer is a member of the consortium, and they have close ties to academia, to local government, because of the regulations that come out, the mandates, the directives, but also access and working with the incubators, the accelerators, and the innovators. So by the end of this year, we will have a regional branch organizer in every major continent of the world. And you can see in some of the countries, we actually have much more coverage. And we are now launching our regional branch organization in Japan through DXIA and Yoshino-san, and that's how we got this invitation. So much appreciated again. But we don't just stop there. We also reach out and work with several other organizations that are alliances or consortiums themselves, helping to look at the way the data is managed, make sure we understand those fundamental aspects, and really, again, accelerate that adoption through this common understanding. Every one of these liaisons that you see here, they were brought forward by the members of the consortium. As I said, this is a member-driven organization, and we have projects working within our consortia, community of consortia that are under the OMG, Object Management Group umbrella. But we also have many projects with the other liaisons in process right now. And I think you also, as I saw, FIWARE was there, working with them. OPC Foundation, I think they have over 800 members themselves. So we have activities going on in many of these areas. And that, again, extends the ecosystem. And some of our own initiatives I talked about. We have a technology spotlight, which then leads to a showcase, which is a use case or case study to demonstrate that value. And then we bring that out even further through webinars, and that brings that awareness, and it actually brings other companies to look and say, this makes a lot of sense to us. This resonates very well. We want to be a part of this consortium. We don't want to be outside looking in. We want to be helping to drive and really develop and build that out and become that thought leadership. So we have our technology showcase. As I said, this is live on our website, and you can see what's been published, but look at all these that are in process. Roughly every 3 weeks, we will be bringing out a new digital twin use case or case study to demonstrate that value. And these are real world applications. So within the consortium, the opportunity for the innovation to showcase the thought leadership, to collaborate together, and to bring that authority and to help to drive new opportunities and even new businesses. That's what this consortium is about. So thank you very much for your time.
Isaac 様ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaacs. So with that, we're going to move into our panel discussion section of this session. I'm going to invite up onto stage Professor Koshizuka and Mr. Banthian, Mr. Henning Banthian, if you'd like to join me on stage. And I'd like to invite back over online the two presenters that were presenting earlier in the session.
じゃあ改めまして
So just to reintroduce everyone who's on our panel now for the discussion, we have Dr. Boris Otto from Fraunhofer. We also have Mr. Henning Banthian from Secretary General of Platform Industry 4.0. We're also joined by Professor Koshizuka from the University of Tokyo. And we have the last presenter that we had, Mr. Dan Isaacs from the Digital Twin Consortium, who is joining us from the US. With that, let's move into our panel discussion. We don't have a lot of time, so let's make the most of it. So from this morning, well, just to go back to this morning, we were talking about data-connected platforms, how will they be built going forward? And this afternoon, we've been talking about how we would leverage such platforms in terms of applications and creating value. And we had a lot of use cases explained to us in the presentations that we've had. So bearing all of that context in mind, thinking about Industry 4.0, this has been around for more than 10 years now, lots of plans and programs associated with it. And as per the presentations that we heard earlier, for years this has been very deliberately moving forward. Recently we see Catena X, Gaia X. We're finally seeing these applications come through. On the other hand, if we look around the world, from back in the day, the situation has changed in many large ways. So today, I wanted to hear a little bit more about those aspects and how you will see that. So two changes that we've identified. The first is changes in the international situation. 10 years ago, I think the world was a very free environment that we were in. Recently, though, there is increased tension perhaps between the US and China, but in fact that wasn't where the problem was. We have the war in Ukraine that's happening, and in fact that open exchange is becoming more difficult, I think, than it used to be. That's my sense. So in that changed international situation, we used to have a vision. Does the vision change? Has it changed? What does it change to? And also in terms of what we do in response, what measures and approach that we take, is there a change in the sequence of development that we're taking? For example, those are the kind of things I wanted to discuss in our panel section. The other thing that I wanted to cover is the technological or technical environment. Because I think although there'd been some forecasts about this, in recent times there's been great leaps forwards in generative AI. huge steps forward there. So again, what impact does that have on our vision or on the sequence of what we want to engage in going forward? Are there any changes that we see as a result of these changes? So I was going to invite comments from all of our panelists from their own unique perspectives on these questions. So I think first I'd like to look at the changes in the international situation to see what vision changes might have arisen because of that, or will be changed, or will not change. So perhaps I can ask Dr. Otto to speak to that point first of all.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, very important points that you mentioned. And if we look into the international landscape, how that changed, let me perhaps share two thoughts with you. I think we have, over the last recent years, seen that there are, let's say, a growing number of, let's say, grand challenges that everyone has to tackle, be it in Europe or in Japan or in the US. And I think it's clear to everybody that these challenges cannot be addressed by single players on their own, but we have to team up. If I, for example, think of climate change, this is something which no country, no company can, of course, address on their own. And one strand to approach these challenges is, for example, to embark into a wider adoption of the circular economy, right? In order to reduce our resource consumption and make sure that we basically make reuse of the resources, of the scarce resources that we use. And that is also one of the drivers, and I'm sure that Hagen Heubach earlier today has mentioned this when he talked about Catena X, where it's not just an opportunity for, let's say, different players in the value chain to team up, but it's really a necessity, right? And I think this is even aggravated because time's running out, right? I mean, we have climate protection goals in Germany and Europe, and I believe also across the world, that are not so far in the future to be reached. We talk about 2030. So there must be a concerted and joint endeavor to really make a change in the way we run business. And I believe that data ecosystems are not the single, of course, solution to achieve these goals, but they are a fundamental enabler and a key pillar in order to embark into this journey, for example, towards climate neutrality. The other thing that I'd like to mention when we talk about this first question is that we see a more complex international environment. I think that we will not basically isolate our economies once more. We will have international collaboration and international value chains also in the future, but the world is going to be more complex, I would think, because due to two things that I'd like to point out. First, in terms of, let's say, higher resilience, countries and companies alike try to, of course, spread their risk exposure. So that means that they would rather not, let's say, reduce the number of relationships that they have, but rather increase them in order basically to, as I say, for example, reduce the risk of running out of certain, let's say, material supply from one country or from one supplier. So we will end up with a even higher number of relationships to maintain. And the other thing is that we also, in these, let's say, international relationships, we see a growing number of data regulation, right? If I look into Europe, for example, the European Commission has been very productive when it comes to issuing legal provisions for the use of data. If I think of the Data Governance Act or the Data Act, which is upcoming. But the same happens also elsewhere on this planet. For example, in China, we have also data regulation, and in Japan as well. And what we need to make sure is when we share data across, let's say, borders or across, let's say, the boundaries of individual economic areas, that we make sure that we adhere to the legal provisions in one area, but also in the other, right? And that will not be possible on a manual basis. So we need to have technology into place. We need to put technology into place, which allows us to be compliant to a certain extent automatically. At least that's my vision, and also point us to conflicts in, let's say, the different regulations. So. For us as a community, there remains many things to do, but life's probably not getting easier.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you. Industry 4.0 is something that I want Mr. Banten to talk about. Can I have your comment on this?
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. Yeah, it's a very good question, and perhaps I'll start answering by sort of giving a little sketch of the strategy we gave us actually many years ago, like 5 years ago, and also which goes back to the very start 10 years ago of the platform industry 4.0. And there were 3 core notions to our work. The one was the autonomy, so to be in a position to, in a sovereign state, decide what technologies, for example, would you use and would you implement. The other core notion was interoperability. So to have, as we have heard often today, the means to actually collaborate internationally on a technical basis. And the third item was sustainability, also looking at issues like climate change. So remembering to that basic strategy we gave us, and back to your question, Murakami-san, I think the really aggravated situation we're in on an international level, in a way, it actually shows that the basic pillars of our strategy were well chosen, because as we see in the current developments, it's exactly these pillars we need to build on to be in a good position to actually react to the challenges we're facing. Boris Otto has just nicely laid them out. So it is about the climate crisis, but which also initiates a migration crisis, which will come up. So this means that the international world will be more and more destabilized. So the way how we can manage our supply chains, for example, or how we organize R&D on a global level, this will become more challenging. But also, I mean, these are sort of the overall trends we're having on a political level. But then looking at the market space, here as well, you see developments who are rather protectionism, who go in that direction, but others who build on very dominant market forces in terms of monopolies being supported, be it state-wise or by just very, very large economic players. This, again, is a considerable risk to the way of, for our understanding of a free economic level playing field would look like. So here again, coming back to your question, I think, yes, there are these very new and grand challenges we're facing, but I think that the topics we have discussed today do direct in the right direction on how we can actually counter these developments.
Thank you. Mr. Isaac, would you like to add to it in terms of international affairs and current affairs, if you will? Any comments would you like to make?
Certainly. I think from the perspective, as you've heard, and we've all experienced, the impact on the supply chain. and being able to understand, it's really being able to look up and down that through the value chain, right? Where Katana X is looking and in different aspects, and really understand that and be able to have that, again, that crystal ball to predict and to forecast. I think that's critical. And that's another aspect of digital transformation that needs to be considered. And then how do you manage that data effectively? And how do you trust that data? I think there's great strides that have been made, but we're really still needing to work considerably in these different areas. And again, mentioning about the circular economy, look at that from an environmental standpoint, from a societal standpoint, equitable. And then that brings back the governance of the data. With great access to data comes great responsibility, and we've already seen, where bad actors can interplay there, and so that security again becomes a very key area to be addressed.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your input. Mr. Koshizuka, from the Japanese perspective or non-Japanese perspective, having listened to the input by 3 discussants, I have come up with 2 points. One is about situation. If you look at the international situation, one being social, political, and economic situations, and the other being the value systems, if you will. Value systems is also changing. If you look at political and economic situations, as you are fully aware, we are witnessing a number of conflicts. So after the end of the Cold War, there has not been much tension, which was quite rare from a historical standpoint, and we are now in an ordinary time space, probably. But technology decoupling and other agendas that have been upheld by different entities. But if you pay attention to the economy, globalization isn't really fragmenting. It is still progressing, and economy and politics have been free and global in the past. But presently, economy is becoming increasingly borderless, whereas politically, it is becoming increasingly divided. So there is a mismatch of economic and political situations, which has been overlooked. So as to how to overcome this gap is an area where we have to think about the roles to be played by the government and the business sector as to how to overcome the mismatch between political and economic realities. Secondly, green or carbon neutrality, climate action are the areas that have been emphasized by German participants today, meaning that your sensitivity is much higher than that of us Japanese. Talking of green or environmental issues, and COVID-19 was another major factor that constituted a major element of our reality. Efficiency and economy are the areas that we have focused to date. Sustainability or well-being even are another elements. Environmental friendliness. These are the elements that are playing a larger role in our value systems. That, I think, is a major international trend in international situations over the last 5 to 10 years. Thank you. Now, from another standpoint, let's discuss technological environments and changes in it. Just recently, this generative AI is now a hot topic. Data sharing or data utilization. Generative AI may have a major impact on the value creation in these areas. Is it something that we have long expected, or is it something that was beyond our expectation? That is a second question. Okay, Mr. Otto first.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that is also an important aspect that and that's basically also good news, right? That we have, let's say, also technology innovation that allows us to address the increasing number of challenges that we are confronted with. And I think we all would agree that Gen AI in general has lots of opportunities that we can seize in order to do that. To be a bit more concrete on what I could imagine as, let's say, next steps of the evolution when it comes to data sharing and data ecosystems, what we see is a lot of, let's say, activities which have recently been started in the endeavor to, evolve data space architectures into something which would, let's say, host a large language model for a certain domain, which is also needed because in the end, and that was also mentioned by Henning Bantin, but also by other speakers, and also by Dan, if I'm not mistaken, interoperability is key. And if we face the truth, we still have huge issues in, let's say, achieving interoperability between, let's say, different systems which form a data infrastructure of a data ecosystem, and or also the different sources that basically data sources that feed a digital twin. And while we still struggle with very foundational problems like, let's say, integration on a syntactic and format or data scheme level, what is a greater challenge to overcome is, of course, semantic interoperability. I mean, semantic technologies and semantic interoperability has been around for 30 years almost. But let's face it, I mean, it's one of the, most unfulfilled promises, if you ask me. So I see great potential through the emergence of LLMs in this domain, because they might help to overcome the semantic integration challenges. Of course, it's, as always, also not a silver bullet, because it's large language models, of course, so it's related to, language and mainly text. And we, as an industrial environment, are used to exchange not only, let's say, unstructured data, documents, for example, but most of the time structured data. But this is, I think, an interesting and promising pathway forward, also in the collaboration between research, academia on the one hand side, but also industrial applications on the other, to further develop the large language model concept and large language models themselves, in order to be better capable to store, if I may, or represent the shared, semantic knowledge of a certain industrial domain. And if we would make that one of the foundations of data spaces in the future, to serve the needs and the different innovative applications which emerge in a data ecosystem, I think this will be a very, very powerful way forward. And we have started already first project to do that. And I think that is very promising, as I said. And also it would allow us, perhaps, that as a last comment, to close the gap between what we sometimes call data engineering on the one hand side, and AI, or what has been used earlier on, data science as a more general term on the other hand. Because again, here, let's face it, it's two different worlds that usually need to be brought together. In data engineering, we usually have engineers which like to basically define standards and directives which everybody should adhere to, and would like to see everything being in nice order. And on the data science and AI side, you rather have, let's call it the urban knowledge worker, who is creative, innovative, and doesn't really want to stick to so many rules. And these two groups need to be brought together. And I think a joint, let's say, endeavor working towards LLMs residing in data spaces and serving a data ecosystem as such might, as a byproduct, also a nice opportunity to bring these different worlds together.
Thank you very much for your informative feedback. Industry 4.0, could you please make a comment, Bashir-san?
Let me first react to a comment you made earlier, because I think that's a very valid point, is that also in the changes in the international landscape, we need to look at the value systems we're actually based on in our work, and I think that is a very fundamental thought also for the way we as countries and industries cooperate. With regard to generative AI, so the first part is I do think we are all surprised with regard to the level of foresight we had, right? So I think the development did catch many by surprise, and the speed in which it develops now as well. And this is interesting, and this should make us think about what the future may bring to us. And just very practically from the last weeks, I had conversations, and this is really with regard now to small and medium-sized companies, because also this is a challenge we share with Japan, how to bring them on the digital transformation path. So far, one of the major obstacles they had was simply the lack of programmers and software experts in smaller companies. Now with generative AI, we have run first experiments where you can ask ChatGPT to sort of program you parts of what you need to digitize your production, and voila, it works quite well. And it takes just a couple of hours a work where you would otherwise would need an expert to do it, and then it would take at least 2 or 3 weeks to do so. And now it's half a day, and you just ask ChatGPT. So what major difference will that make? So I think that's a huge opportunity, which is really interesting for us to look at. And another point, I think again, the two countries having such a strong basis in the industrial sector, we need to strongly look at the industrial data we sit on and we have, and how to explore it and make sure that AI is actually building its competence on these very specific data where we have a lot of knowledge and expertise in, to make a competitive advantage out of that.
Thank you. Mr. Isaac, would you like to add any comments to this topic?
I think just as we've seen just the swiftness of the adoption of the generative AI and AI in general, looking at that, we continue to see the evolution. And just a few days ago, right, the announcement where it came out, one of the headlines of one of the articles actually read specifically AI advanced changes everything again. It really was about not just LLMs, but now about large multimodal AI. So now you're combining this out, and this is just a matter of days where this has been now brought out. And I would also liken this as an evolution that we're seeing unfold right before our eyes. And we're seeing the very rapid democratization of this technology throughout. There was that one famous quote, I guess, that was brought out before, where they said, "There is no moat." The genie's out of the bottle, and we're seeing this evolve so quickly. And even within the membership of the consortium, we're seeing this evolution of digital twins. And this is, again, coming from the founder of the concept, Dr. Michael Greaves, back in the early 2000s. He wrote a pivotal paper on product lifecycle management, where he was identifying this concept and working with John Vickers, who's lead at NASA for advanced manufacturing, brought out this term, digital twin, which Dr. Vickers said, that really is a very appropriate term. I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it. And he leveraged that. But he said, I will always give John Vickers the credit for the coining the term. But he's taken that to the next level. He wrote a pivotal paper again. It's one of the most highly downloaded papers on digital twin off ResearchGate. And that's looking at the complexity of systems and the evolution of a digital twin in terms of how it is being really evolving from a goal-directed and a passive scenario where we have told it, this is what we want to see the trigger event. We want to be informed at this point, to now looking at it from much more active and having these AI agents always monitoring. And rather than goal-directed, it's actually goal-seeking and being able to look at that. And we're seeing that evolution play out with the infusion of AI in many of these different areas from that standpoint. And I think we are on that rapid evolutionary path right now.
ありがとうございました。じゃあ。
Thank you very much. Dr. Koshizuka, I have two things. The first one is about AI. Machine learning, deep learning is the base as well as the current generative AI. I actually don't like the word AI because what's happening right now is not really AI. I think it's not AI, but it's data-driven intelligence. That's how we should call it. AI was Professor Murakami in 1965 proposed this word, artificial intelligence. And in 20 or 30 years after that, first-order logic and logic-based has been the path. And we used this logic and AI, so it got to its limitation. So we started to use data. We got internet. And so the second generation in the 1980s, the AI at that time, and the current machine learning and what the current AI have right now, the technology base is completely opposite. It's so different. But we're still calling it artificial intelligence. Who named it? It is a data-driven intelligence. It's not driven from logic. It's driven from data. So I don't think artificial intelligence is the right way to call it. It should be data-driven intelligence, or DDI.
So what I want to say is here, let's call it data-driven intelligence. That's the first thing that I wanted to say. And also, when you think about machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, when you think about technology, there are still many things that are just unknown. Because why does generative AI, when it gets to a certain scale, suddenly begin to exhibit intelligence that still hasn't been understood? And when you think about scalability and the scaling log, how far will it continue to scale up to is still unknown. How far will it continue to scale up to is unknown. There's so many things that are still unknown right now. So there's still room for development in this technology. I think we should recognize that. We should know that. And when you talk about this from a data perspective, leveraging data to have intelligence, that's what it is. In which case, it's a consumer of data, and also it's generating data. So it's a producer of data as well. So in that sense, for the data sector, mustn't call it AI, DDI, that's what I must call it. So DDI is a really critical technology. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say, I think that everyone has forgotten right now that I think is really important from a technological perspective, is Moore's law. So computers will not get any faster. This is Moore's law. They won't get any faster. Since the computers have been born, it's the first age that we live in that the computers will not get any faster. So whether it's an AI chip, they can only do things in series. And it doesn't matter what they can adapt to, but we can't speed up the clocks anymore. So computer technologies, is changing a lot. It should be changing a lot, and it is. And we have to keep thinking about this and figure out infrastructure going forward, and we have to invest. We have to think about that now. I see. Thank you very much. So we have used up quite a lot of our time, so I want to come on to just the last point, just a word from each of our panelists. So I'd like to take some questions from the floor and others. If anyone in the venue has any comments or questions, I would welcome that. I'd like to take maybe one or two. If there are no questions from the floor, then we will shift to our online forum and we'll take a look at answering some of those questions. So first of all, a question for Dr. Otto. The data ecosystem that you talked about, the structure of the ecosystem and deciding rules of the ecosystem, openness, transparency are important. I agree, says the person with the question. But at the same time, sometimes you don't reach a consensus. That can be very time intensive. I felt that those could be challenges associated with that process. So in Europe, how do you deal with that? How have you overcome those challenges of time intensiveness? Or did you simply spend a lot of time and have a lot of discussion? That was the question. Dr. Otto, could you answer that?
Yes, I mean, we definitely spend a lot of time in discussing much, but that's probably not the answer to this question. No, I think it's right. I mean, of course, as I mentioned, we need to find the right balance between openness and transparency on the one hand side, and on the other hand, also the protection of the interest of the data providers and of the data users. So this balance is one of the key ingredients, so to say, of a functioning ecosystem. And the question is perfectly right, because if we would rely on, let's say, manual negotiation, for example, by two legal departments of a data provider organization and a data receiver organization, then that would just take too long and would be too expensive in order to allow for fruitful business cases. Therefore, we need to implement both the, as I said, the policy management for the data into technology, but also the negotiation process. Because, I mean, yeah, everybody has preferences about what to do with certain pieces of data. For example, and as I said, in the circular economy use cases, and data providers have also other preferences about what should be done with their data and what should not. And these kind of preferences can be translated and represented in machine-readable format. And what we do is we use rule languages to do that. For example, ODRL. So it's an open digital right language, which allows us to represent these preferences in a machine-readable form. And then basically use algorithms to negotiate the different, let's say, schemas or settings in terms of policies which data providers put on their data, and which also data users have in their mind in terms of what they want to do with the data from other sources. That is one strand of work that we follow, but of course there are others. I'm not sure whether Hagen-Heubach mentioned that earlier today, but in Catena X we came up with what we call the flight level model. So we have different levels of governance in a data ecosystem, where the highest level basically defines, okay, if I want to join Catena X, I have to obey this 10 commandments, for example, basically written on paper. But if you go down then 4 levels, then you end up in what I described before, that we have, let's say, a technical representation of the policies which are attached to the data, and also instrument into place, which allows us to negotiate the different preferences in order then come to an agreement, to a consent, which then also is basically stored in the distributed data infrastructure.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Otto. I'd like to take one more question. It's just at the bottom here. It's in English. It's a question for Mr. Isaacs, I think.
System in manufacturing company resulting no.
I'm not able to see that on my screen. If you could.
Okay. 画面上に映ってない。
Oh, I see. It's not on your screen. My apologies. Oh, I thought it was on your screen. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so we see many.
There, but it's very, very small for me.
Okay, so I read it, this question.
There we go.
We see many zero systems in manufacturing company, resulting in no unified data models. Would object-oriented approach help improving this situation?
I think the better way to look at that is more in terms of how do you ensure that interoperability between those areas? You know, how can we, I won't say break the silos down, but how can we assure there are at least conduits of that information to be able to allow that data flow between those different areas? I think also standardization and the use of these standards, which there really is no one standard for a digital twin, if we look at it in that context, because it's very application dependent. But what you look for is the way through the different capabilities, that's where the standards exist. And now the question is, how do you ensure that you can have that interoperability between those areas? You know, look at it in terms of different aspects related to that. So yes, from I guess some of the different areas for manufacturing with those data silos, how can you bring that information out through different standards that allow the interoperability, as has been discussed, which is so key to this, especially when you look at a system of systems that needs to be considered. So I think that's where you really need to look at that, and how can you, how can you provide that opportunity to have that data flow through those different areas and those conduits between that? Think about that as digital connections. What are the digital connectors? I think that was mentioned earlier that could be applied in this case.
Hi.
Thank you very much. So time is pressing. We don't have a lot, I'm afraid, left to us. So I would like to, at this very last juncture, looking at the world situation, looking at changes in technology, I'd like to invite our panelists to talk about what they feel are areas of most focus or most interest. And I'm going to give each panelist 1 or 2 minutes, and that will close out our session. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Otto, please.
Well, that's not easy. I think, as I said, I mean, there are a lot of, let's say, challenges, and the number of them is increasing, and you have the impression that we're in constant crisis mode. So it's not a crisis, but it's a permanent state. I think we should, let's say, not forget, let's say, that we have it in our hands, and innovation is the pathway forward for a better life, for better societies, and let's say more efficient and environmental friendly business operations. I'm a true believer that that data is one of the most strategic resources to spur this this journey towards a better life. And to me, it's also very fascinating, and still a lot of, let's say, motivation to make a contribution in such a collaborative environment to move forward on this journey. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also truly convinced that this can only be done together. And therefore, I'm so glad that we have this this collaboration also between Japan and Europe, and in particular Germany. Have been having this for quite some time. There are a lot of, let's say, there's a lot of work for us still to do, but I think we are well prepared, and I think we should keep up this spirit in driving, let's say, technological innovation forward for the better of our societies and economies.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
では、ハンセさん。
To tie back your question, so the aspect of technology and link it back to the grand challenges we were starting off with in our discussion, and to focus on the notion of sustainability, or as it is today is often called the ESG criteria in company strategies, because I think to make up our minds, what is technology-wise the focus we should look at in order to fulfill sustainability goals. And here, for example, and also today, we have discussed new opportunities within circularity. What are all the opportunities we have and the new technological solutions we can build in developing circularity systems. These create new business models, new sources for value creation, and they fulfill sustainability goals. And here again, I think it super well showcases this is only possible if we work based on data spaces and if we work collaboratively on an international level in a close cooperation as we have it between Japan and Europe, Germany. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Isaac?
Yeah, I think it really, the common theme we've heard here is that no one man is an island. It really is about this collaboration and being able to work together to achieve these really very challenging goals, and facing it head on with technology. And I won't say AI, I will say the data-driven intelligence is really where we see this continuing to be across all industries. Very excited about what's going on now in healthcare and life science as a result. It really shows how technology can provide that continued advancement for the betterment of society and of all of us. And I think looking at that from an environmental, from a sustainable, you've heard about from the circular economy, looking at those from that perspective, I think that's critical. And obviously with the governance, there's many opportunities, and we've already seen this across the board in bad actors and the ethics that are now surrounding AI and the use of that. So I think all those things need to be considered, and again, look at it from the security and the trustworthiness of that data. So I think we need to look at that from an overall perspective, and this collaboration is what will help to drive that on a global scale.
Thank you very much. And finally, Professor Koshizuka, I would like to make 2 points. One, global perspective, overall perspective. We live in an era of data for the following reasons. Be it digital or IT, mechanism aspect, it has picked out, if you will. Computer science papers is decreasing in number because no new mechanism can be created, because object-based thinking is probably the last piece of, and then Moore's law has collapsed. Then the next protagonist is data. And that is the shift we are seeing. So you really have to have an overall perspective. AI and DDI. AI is probably the terminology from the mechanism people. In academia, AI is the only hot topic, if you will. So that is why I consider that overall perspective is needed. ICT and digital has this new protagonist topic, which is DDI. So that is one thing that we should not overlook. Well, I'm so sorry that I had to mention that the speed of progress is rather slow. But data is the protagonist, and it is at the core of the progress. The other point, international collaboration is so important. Due to the pandemic, there has been some disruptions, but data sharing and collaboration needs to be promoted on a global scale. So today's symposium has been serving as a great springboard to further promote international collaboration. So I look forward to working with you all. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all the discussants on the panel. Despite the time was limited, I thought that we have been able to have a very substantive discussion. With a warm round of applause, we would like to close this session. Thank you very much for all your interventions and contributions.
はい。
Thank you. Bye-bye.
それではこのセッションは
With this, session 2 is closed. We'll have a short break, and we'll be resuming the session from 3:15 p.m. Session 3, we will discuss Japan-German collaboration.